WETA, in cooperation with the Library of Congress, presents Verse and Conversation. Now here is your moderator, Mr. William J. Smith, Consultant in Poetry, the Library of Congress.
We are delighted to welcome back to Washington two of the country's most celebrated poets, Miss Louise Bogan and Mr. J.V. Cunningham. Louise Bogan served as the consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress for the 1945-46 term. Alan Tate said of her in 1944 that she had a sustained power and a sense of form that nobody else can quite equal. Mr. Tate's judgment is borne out by the publication of Louise Bogan's most recent book, The Blue Estuaries, Poems 1923-1926, which clearly establishes her in the United States as the leading woman lyric poet of the 20th century. Miss Bogan's earlier volumes include The Sleeping Fury, Poems 1937, and Collected Poems 1923-1953, published in 1954. For almost 4 decades, poetry reviewer of The New Yorker, Miss Bogan is, of course, equally well known as a critic of poetry. A volume of her selected criticism appeared in 1955. I personally know Louise Bogan not only as a poet and a critic, but also as an anthologist, since it was my great pleasure to collaborate with her in compiling The Golden Journey, Poems for Young People, published in 1965, which has happily found a wide audience in schools and libraries. Miss Bogan has received awards from Poetry, the National Institute of Arts and Letters, Brandeis University, and in 1955 she shared with Leonie Adams the Bollingen Prize in Poetry. Like Louise Bogan, J.V. Cunningham is a writer in the classic manner, a master of the short poem whose output, although small, has never varied in its excellence. In 1961, Mr. Tom Gunn called him one of the most accomplished poets alive, and one of the few of whom it can be said that he will still be worth reading in 50 years' time. Mr. Cunningham's books of poetry include The Helmsman, 1942, The Judge's Fury, 1947, The Exclusions of a Rhyme, Poems and Epigrams, 1960, To What Strangers, What Welcome, a sequence of short poems, 1964, and the recently published Some Salt, 1967. Mr. Cunningham is well known also as a critic and a scholar. He has been professor of English since 1953 at Brandeis University. He was a Guggenheim Fellow in 1959 and again in 1966, and a grantee of the National Institute of Arts and Letters in 1965 and of the National Endowment for the Arts in 1966-67. And now I'd like to ask first Miss Bogan to read one of her most famous poems, Song for the Last Act.
Right. This is a poem which was rewritten after a good many years of being unfinished in a portfolio, and as you will see, it's in 3 recognizable sections or sort of triptychs. Now that I have your face by heart, I look less at its features than its darkening frame, where quince and melon, yellow as young flame, lie with quilled dahlias and the shepherd's crook. Beyond a garden, there in insolent ease, the lead and marble figures watch the show of yet another summer loath to go, although the scythes hang in the apple trees. Now that I have your face by heart, I look. Now that I have your voice by heart, I read in the black chords upon a dulling page, music that is not meant for music's cage, whose emblems mix with words that shake and bleed. The staves are shuttled over with a stark, unprinted silence. In a double dream I must spell out the storm, the running stream, The beat's too swift, the notes shift in the dark. Now that I have your voice by heart, I read. Now that I have your heart by heart, I see the wharves with their great ships and architraves, the rigging and the cargo and the slaves on a strange beach under a broken sky. Oh, not departure, but a voyage done. The bales stand on the stone, the anchor weeps its red rust downward, and the long vine creeps beside the salt herb in the lengthening sun. Now that I have your heart by heart, I see.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Cunningham, I wonder if you'd read those two poems about Montana that made such an impression at the Library of Congress last night.
Well, thank you. This is the Montana of the Eastern Plains, not the mountains. The first, Montana Pastoral. I am no shepherd of a child's surmises. I have seen fear where the coiled serpent rises, thirst where the grasses burn in early May, and thistle, mustard, and the wild oat stay. There is dust in this air. I saw in the heat grasshoppers busy in the threshing wheat. So to this hour, through the warm dusk I drove to blizzards sifting on the hissing stove, and found no images of pastoral will, but fear, thirst, hunger, and this huddled chill. The second is entitled Montana 50 Years Ago. Gaunt kept house with her child for the old man. Met at the train, dust-driven as the sink she came to, the child white as the alkali. To the west, distant mountains, the big lake to the northeast, dead trees and almost dead in the front yard, the front door locked and nailed, a hand pump in the sink. Outside a land of gophers, cottontails, and rattlesnakes, in good years of alfalfa, oats, and wheat. Root cellar, blacksmith shop, milk house and barn, granary, corral, an old world almanac to thumb at night, the child coughing, the lamp smoked, the chores done. So he came to her one night, to the front room, now bedroom, and moved in. Nothing was said, nothing was ever said. And then the child died and she disappeared. This was Montana 50 years ago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cunningham.